If you were watching from far away, you might wonder if Texans along the Guadalupe River stood any chance at all.
There were campgrounds there, there were homes, there were people that were seemingly caught off guard.
The destruction had already been done before the warnings came out. It was almost every man for himself.
Headlines from the earliest days of deadly flash flooding pointed to an alarming lack of warning. The central question being, how could so many people have been caught so off guard? Was there any heads up at all that a major river was about to burst its banks? The Guadalupe River lies in a part of central and south Texas called Flash Flood Alley. It flows east, ending through San Antonio Bay on the Gulf Coast, but it's where the river starts, in a place called Kerr County, where most of the attention has been focused.
At least 82 people have died and more than 40 remain missing, including children.
River rose more than 20 feet, crashing into homes and swallowing roads, leaving people very little time to escape.
Some 400 first responders are now scouring the swollen Guadalupe River and its banks.
Now, there were warnings ahead of time, at least 3 of which have now been widely reported. So what explains the account from officials who sound like this?
Rest assured, no one knew this kind of flood was coming.
There's no expectation of a water wall of almost 30 feet high.
Let's try to understand what happened and when. It is true that predicting a major weather event with pinpoint accuracy is just really hard to do. And I'll show you what I mean, starting with the day before the flood.
This storm, this rain is expected to be going on until the night and into tomorrow.
That is a signal of localized flash flooding in parts of our area.
For at least several days, most in the San Antonio region would have been well aware that flooding was a possibility, but welcome to Flash Flood Alley. And many forecasts were calling for just a few inches of rain, which is significant, but it's this much.
We had no reason to believe that this was going to be anything like what's happened here. None whatsoever.
It wasn't until late at night, 11:22 p.m., just hours before floodwaters hit, we would see this warning from the U.S. Office of Water Prediction. Rapid runoff is expected. Considerable flash and urban flash flooding is possible. The nocturnal timing will also enhance the hazard potential and impacts, meaning it'll be bad, in part because everyone's asleep. But even if you were awake, look how broad the so-called area of concern is. I mean, just San Antonio to Austin is more than 100 kilometers. This is a big area. Kerr County itself would get its first warning of life-threatening flash flooding at 1:14 in the morning. This would have triggered the emergency alert system and woken people out of bed, assuming you had weather alerts turned on in the first place, and assuming you didn't simply click the warning off and go back to bed, and assuming you had cell service in the first place.
There's a lot of areas, especially when weather comes in, where cellular towers are down or you already have bad service.
Among those communities where cell coverage might have been spotty was a place called Camp Mystic, an all-girls summer camp along the southern fork of the Guadalupe River. In the middle of the night, water rushed through the camp, ripping through cabins, upturning beds, furniture, leaving behind a mess of debris and death.
A summer camp overrun by floodwaters.
A growing death toll in a search to find missing young girls.
The emergency alert that would have warned people around the communities of Hunt and Kerrville themselves, warning these campers of the wall of water about to hit them, it came too little too late at 5:34 a.m. local time, along with the message, flash flooding is already occurring. And even if that message had arrived in time, which it didn't, most, if not all, campers would not have gotten the message directly on their own phones anyway. Camp Mystic's own rules, we can see here in a letter sent to parents. It makes very clear what is considered an unacceptable electronic device for any camper to bring: cell phones, tablets, or smartwatches of any type. At the time I record this, officials believe at least 10 people from Camp Mystic are still missing, including one counselor. This is 3 days after the flooding, and this is what that water might have looked and felt like, high and strong. This video was posted by the city of Kerrville later that morning. There are entire pieces of trees flowing through this water, and if you look way in the background, many of the trees that are still upright are mostly submerged. And just to show you another vantage point, I've cross-referenced the exact point where that video was shot with this Google Street View. It's the Sydney Baker Bridge in Kerrville, which is just about 30 kilometers up the road from Camp Mystic. Except here, if I swing around, this is what the river normally looks like. And here's the river when it's 20 to 30 feet higher. You see how the water line goes right up to where I'm dragging my cursor, and this little building here with the triangular roof. If I tap back to the street view, that little building with the triangular roof, that's here. So all of this land that you see is covered in water. That's what getting months of rain in just a few hours looks like.
That river rose 26 feet in 45 minutes.
No warnings at all. They came hours later, which was the most devastating part.
This was the biggest, and I don't know why we don't have an early warning system on this river.
It is absolutely true that a great number of people in the direct path of the floodwaters would have had no warning because instead of sirens, they had text alerts. Maybe they went completely unseen.
Most people at 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. are asleep.
Or maybe those texts were simply dismissed.
The concern is flash flood watches are issued so often, people may tune them out.
I'm on the record for saying the National Weather Service overall in the United States issues too many warnings.
Because remember, Flash Flood Alley. Flash floods do happen in this part of Texas all the time. Sometimes they are deadly. The state has already seen several dangerous flooding events this year, which, if you live in that region, might either make you hyper-aware or desensitized. Because flash flooding events across the US were at an all-time high last year, and most of them are nothing like what just happened. Experts say the Guadalupe River flood was a 1 in 100-year event, and that it's simply not possible to predict well in advance that a cluster of thunderstorms dumping months' worth of rain would stall over a specific spot.
A lot of our operations plans, especially with these camps, that is the plan, is sometimes shelter in place, get them to those known high grounds, and then wait for rescue. Again, when this came in, people were sleeping. Even if you were able to try to get notification, that evacuation period is a very delicate balance. Disasters in Texas everywhere. It's very tough to make those calls because what we also don't want to do is cry wolf.
But this is where we introduce a very political dimension to this story, because it isn't just the question, did officials take what warning signs they had seriously enough? It's also, did they adequately prepare, knowing how prone the area is to flash flooding in the first place? For years, Kerr County officials have debated installing some kind of flood warning system, but that never came to be. Too expensive. And then there's the Trump factor.
One of the things that's predictable is that you see some people engaging in, I think, partisan games and trying to blame their political opponents for a natural disaster.
There is an open question right now about whether Trump's budget cuts to the government agency that operates the National Weather Service is in some way to blame here. That if hundreds of employees hadn't have been laid off, if observation and research labs hadn't have been stripped down or closed altogether, maybe there would have been more lead time for people to escape the devastation. To that, there is no clear conclusion right now. No established line of causation by any expert that I've heard between cuts and whether a destructive flood on this scale could have been predicted and avoided. And anyone who definitively says otherwise, it's just too early to say.
These offices were well staffed. In fact, one of the offices was actually overstaffed. They had more people than they need. So any claim to the contrary is completely false.
But there are some vacancies at these offices, including the very critical coordinator on these type of catastrophe that links the information coming from the meteorologists to the local officials on the ground.
But the outcome is tragic either way. More than 100 people are dead, and more beyond that still missing. City and county officials have been clear that is their focus right now. The political postmortem comes later.